Hi, welcome back. We're going to be talking now a little bit about why it is that popularity is so important. How come this is something that is affecting us so much when we're young? And how come it's something we seem to kind of gravitate towards for the rest of our lives? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. One thing I'm going to point out is the idea that this has become really explicit. Have you ever noticed recently if you are on the web, there is a lot of information about what's trending? Whether you're on Twitter or whether you're just even looking at a news story or anything you see. You'll sometimes see these graphics that talk about how many times has a story been tweeted, or how many people have liked it on Facebook, or how many comments are there. And often that's right at the top of the story. In fact, even after you're done reading the story, there's maybe those icons again, encouraging you like, you should tweet about it, you should like it on Facebook. Why is that happening? We've kind of almost grown accustomed to it. I think one of the reasons why this is happening is because it's based on this fundamental premise that if we see that a lot of people are really interested in something, we will think somehow it's good, it's important. We want to do what everyone else is doing, even if we resist that idea and think, no, I'm individual. I don't just confirm. Still, we're kind of a bit influenced by that. We think, well, it's if that's something that 3,000 other people have liked, then it must be something really important that I need to look at. It's the same thing when you watch a commercial and they say this is the number of a movie at the box office. Number one movie at the box office. They're really trying to pull on the idea that it's popular and therefore that means it's good. But why does that work so well? Why do we even care about the fact that everyone else is doing it? I mean, I want to read the news stories that I think are of interest to me. And I don't think my interests are going to be the same as 10,000 other people and that read the same news story. So why would I automatically think that that's important? It turns out that a lot of this might have to do with the way that we developed as a species. And the way that we can think about that is we took a step way back and thought about this from an evolutionary perspective. So let's go back to the world of cavemen and women, and really thought about what life was like at that time, because that's how we developed the brains we have today. Even thought that's a long time ago. That's not very long ago from the perspective of our biological development. So there are lots of ways that what happened back then is still influencing us today, and it's still influencing how our brains work. So have you ever noticed how if you yawn and other people around you will yawn? Yawns are kind of contagious. Or have you ever heard that when women live together, close quarters, or spend a lot of time together, their menstrual cycles will start to synchronize? That all has to do with the same idea here. It's the sense that when we were cave people a long time ago, we quickly learned that we're going to do a lot better if we live together. And if we kind of pay attention to signals from each other. So if you think about it, if you went on your own, well, you would have a hard time getting food, right? And if you got food, you would and you killed something like a giant wilder beast or whatever, you're not going to be able to eat all of that by yourself. So it's really inefficient. And if you try to save the rest of it, it's going to spoil and you're going to get sick and die, and evolutionarily you're going to be weeded out. So really learn that when it comes to food, same with safety, protecting one another. Or when it comes to our ways of coordinating activities, like when should we all go to sleep? What that way we can all go to the next part of where nomadic group, so that helps us to get to the next part of where we're trying to move to. It would be a good if that was all synchronized, and we were in a heart, and we learned to be a heart. And the more you stay in the heart, the more you sleep when everyone sleeps. That way we can all work together and move together at the same time. We more The more that everyone stops to give birth to conceive new babies, that should all happen at the same time. We should all eat together. We should all protect each other. If you're leaving that herd, then those things will be threatened. You wouldn't get food. You wouldn't be safe. You wouldn't stop at the same times as and you might get kicked out. You might be alone. You might be unsafe, and that's not good for you. But people did that. They were weeded out through natural selection. And we all the people that survived learning to pay attention to what the herd has to say. It turns out that has had a really cool indelible effect on how our brains are put together. But we just recently discovered this in ways that we kind of didn't even expect. So there have been a lot of researchers that have been interested in understanding how the brain works, and in particular, there have been a lot of people that have looked at how the brain kind of lights up in fMRI, and let's say when we express pain. So what I mean by that is there have been a lot of studies where they have asked people to lay down in fMRIs. They're kind of laying there, and they show them a screen over their head, and they give them an opportunity to experience something types of stimuli. Now in some cases those might be real life stimuli. So while their hands is sticking out of fMRI, they might have a little prick of or something sort of a pain stimulus. And when that happens, the fMRI would allow them to see what areas of the brain are kind of lightening up. And what we learned was very reliably for a very long time we've seen in research. That there are particular areas that tell us that we're experiencing pain, and there are areas that tell us it's time to start regulating this pain and doing something about it. Now the parts of our brain that signal pain, it's really important because the pain is our ways off. It's the brain's way of telling us something very serious is happening. You need to do something about it. This is going to threaten your survival. So pain is kind of the most powerful signal that our brains can give us, to tell us that if we don't do something soon, we might die, or our species may be in trouble. Well, an interesting thing happens. So there were some researchers, including Naomi Eisenberger from UCLA, who decided to do some studies looking at people in the fMRI machine and the magnet. And they asked them to, instead of getting real pain, they asked them to participate in some interactions where they were getting excluded by others. And the way that this worked was sometimes there were real people that folks were communicating with while they were in the magnet, and sometimes they were just pretend. But either way, the experimenters put it together so the person in the fMRI magnet thought that they were being excluded, and that others were choosing not to interact with them. So in a way, it was kind of like they were getting a signal saying, you're getting kicked out of a herd. You're not part of a group anymore. You're getting excluded. It turns out they were very surprised to find that when people got the signal to say that they were getting excluded, the parts of their brain that lit up were the parts of the brain that lit up when they experienced real physical pain. And this kind of led to the idea that there might be something called social pain. We experience social exclusion in the exact same way that we experience physical pain. In fact, there's even research to say that if you take Tylenol, then that helps your social pain to go down, just like it helps your physical pain go down. So maybe this is why the way that we say it in English, our language, tends to mirror the idea of pain. We talk about heartbreak or homesickness. It's the idea that we experience physical symptoms from a social rejection experience. So it kind of suggests that there is something may that the lack of popularity makes us experience pain. And our brain is telling us with its most powerful signal, you need to do something about this. Don't get kicked out of a herd. Make sure that you are safe. It turns out there's something other research also. There's some other research also that has to do with our DNA. That's found that this is even more powerful than we even realized. But before we talk about that, I just have to tell you briefly about something that's really new, and it's the idea of epigenetics. Epigenetics is really the sense that while we all have our DNA in every single cell in our bodies has DNA in its cells, that DNA, not every gene is turned on. Some genes turns on later, and some genes never turn on. But when we recently learned in epigenetics that sometimes what makes those cells turn on certain DNA is something that happens in our environments. So believe it or not, someone could walk in the room, they could say hello to you, or they could say something not pleasant to you that kind of rejects you. And that will actually affect your happiness in your own cells. And the reason why this is important is because, as you probably know, many of our cells are dying every second, and new cells are growing every second. So if an experience happens to you now, the cells that will start growing 2 seconds from now are going to start relying on the DNA that was activated by what happened to you before. In fact, it's been suggested that every 6 months or so where the person that is reactive to most happened to us and those prior cells about 6 months ago. So we are constantly renewed people that are living through epigenetics based on what happened to us months before. It turns out our social experiences have an incredibly important impact on that DNA. So for the same reasons we talked about before, with hurting and with our evolutionary legacy. We learned that it sometimes happens to us that makes us feel rejected when our bodies turn on specific DNA. And the DNA they turn on has to do with our physical health. So again, let's think about cave people. If you were a person that was living back in those times, one of the things that happened when you lived with others, if you found that you got a lot of colds. And the reason why is because viruses spread from human to human. So as long as you're interacting with other people, your DNA is actively is activated to develop immunity to viruses, and all of the genes that help us to resist viruses are upregulating. So, in other words, they are kind of turned on. If you were part of a herd, there was much less of a chance that a dinosaur was going to come and eat your arm off. Therefore, you wouldn't have to have all of the inflammatory types of responses in your body to quick heal that bleeding limb and keep you to survive. You wouldn't need that kind of pro-inflammatory protection as much. Well, what happens is the minute we get rejected by others, we actually find that genes that help us to resist viruses become downregulated. In fact, you can take a blood test 40 minutes later and find that you can see the signs of that so quickly. Meanwhile, the inflammatory responses all upregulate. So, of course, if something happens to you 1 minute today, that doesn't mean you're going to have an inflammatory disease unnecessarily. But if you experience chronic rejection over so much time, you experience waves of feelings that you're not part of a herd. You're not someone that is accepted and popular. Then over time yourselves will continually develop this upregulated inflammatory response. So it turns out that popularity is actually changing the way that our DNA expresses. This has major implications for health, and it turns out that there is a way that has a feedback loop into our brains, and it even changes our mood and our experiences too. And we'll talk about it more of that later. And we'll talk about. So in summary, it's important to remember that one of the reasons we seem to care so much about popularity is that our species, about being in a herd as something we needed for safety. And the minute that we lose popularity, our body is preparing us for what will happen when we're kicked out of a herd. And our brains is telling us with its most powerful signal, you're needing to do something to fix this. Go back to others, do what you can, and be part of a group. And that's really important. Our DNA is changing. This is all very adaptive, but unfortunately, it's not really helpful for us today. In the millennium that we live in now, you can go out and for a fun walk on your own and not get eaten by a dinosaur. So unfortunately our bodies are helping us in a way that would affect being useful millions of years ago. But it's not necessarily helpful in today's society. And that's some of the reasons why popularity plays such a huge role today. But it has effects on us that aren't necessarily what we would have wished for.